Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. Continuing the exploration of the gateless barrier. Case 24. Fengxue, Equality and Differentiation. A monk asked priest Fengxue, "Speech and silence are concerned with equality and differentiation. How can I transcend equality and differentiation?" Fengxue said, "I always think of Jiang Nan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers." Wu Men says, Feng Shui functions like lightning, creating an appropriate way to practice. But why does he get involved with the tongue of a predecessor and not free himself? If you can see intimately into this point, the way will open for you naturally. Now set aside the samadhi of words. Just give me one phrase. Wu Men's verse says, "It was not a verse of elegant tone. Before speaking, it's already expressed. If you go on chattering glibly, you'll find yourself at a loss." Today's case, as a middle day case, continuing, sometimes it's really fascinating to me, I think, how these talks sometimes, or the subject of these talks sometimes lines up so neatly. Just continuing from where I left off in the gateless barrier, this Feng Shui comes up on equality and differentiation. And this is something that I've been talking about over the past couple of days. And in interview, this is something that has come up over and over again. Feng Shui is a direct ancestor. In the lineage chant that we do in the evening, we include our sort of the traditional, what's called the patriarchal line. As well, in our ancestry and in the lineage chant that we do, we include and recognize ancestors who are also from other lineages and other traditions. Our lineage chant is one which really recognizes many people who have upheld and continued this practice, many of whom were never acknowledged, even in their lifetime, for the contribution that they made to the perpetuation and to the furtherance of this practice. Fengxue is one that did. In fact, in our particular lineage, he's a person of great importance because he existed at a time when the 3 or 4 Dharma descendants, successors, all of whom went out and taught. It was only Fengxue who had a successor. So the particular branch of Rinzai Zen that we practice in goes directly back to Fengxue, this teacher. And maybe we can get to know him or come to meet him in this case. This is the only case in the Gateless Barrier that he is in, although he has a couple appearances in the Blue Cliff record as well. A monk asked the priest Fengxue, speech and silence are concerned with equality and differentiation. How can I transcend equality and differentiation? So, talking about equality and differentiation, and that's what we've been doing for the past several days, is investigating these 2 activities that, as I was taught, can be called the activity of plus and the activity of minus. The activity of arising into differentiation. All things being born simultaneously together. Pratitya samutpada. The world of the relative, you could say. Subject-object world. And the activity of minus or dissolution. The activity of melting away. The dying activity. Returning to the origin in which there is no inside and no outside. The world of absolute equality. I think one of the real challenges that we have as human beings is, particularly as we develop and grow up in this world, we live in a world of the subjective, of the differentiated, and we're encouraged to do so more and more as we get older. We're encouraged to clarify who we are, what we want, where we're going, what we're going to be when we grow up, all those kinds of things. Many of us pursue our fulfillment, pursue our completion in the world of differentiation. Pursuing the best job, or the best partner, or the biggest bank account. But when we pursue fulfillment or satisfaction or completion in this way, it's very difficult to find it. Because even when we find the best job, or the best partner, or the biggest bank account, upon our arrival, that new peak just gives us a better view to see the next peak, which always seems better. I was reading an article recently about, they were interviewing millionaires, people who had become millionaires. And they asked them, do you feel financially stable or financially secure? And almost all of them said, no, And then they asked them, how much money do you think you would have to feel financially secure? And the average answer was $5 million. That would make me feel financially secure. I'm quite sure that if you asked people who had acquired $5 million if they felt financially secure, that they would probably all again say no. Maybe 10 million or 20 million. I think it goes up like that exponentially. It's not just like 6 million would do. Maybe 20 million, then I'd be okay. When we don't find satisfaction in the world of differentiation, we can begin to look elsewhere. And maybe sometimes we come to the world of spiritual practice. Sometimes it's Zen, but there's lots of spiritual practices, and some of them point to this other activity, the activity of dissolution or unification. In fact, many of them do, and they talk about it in different ways. Sometimes it's spoken about as in the uniting with the Godhead, or merging, becoming one with Brahma. In Zen, we talk about the dissolution into the our empty origin, mu, shunyata, emptiness. And when we hear about this, when we learn about this teaching of minus, or even have some experience of that dissolution, that completion through dissolution, we can begin to pursue our completion in that activity of dissolution, minus activity. But ultimately, the experience of absolute minus, mu, emptiness, is profoundly elusive. Why? Well, if the experience of emptiness is something we want to have, we want to possess or control or grasp, we're up for a great deal of disappointment, because the realization, the manifestation of emptiness is necessarily free of any self to have it, to hold it, to view it, to experience it. Dogen Zenji says, don't expect to see or to recognize your own awakening. So we have these experiences of minus, dissolution, or we can say that emptiness manifests. But as one of my teachers used to say, this is the manifestation of emptiness. This is the manifestation of complete zero. This is the manifestation of unconditional love, unconditioned love. There is no inside, there's no outside, there's no subject, and there's no object. This is the completion of the minus activity. But what he also used to say is that, and in this perfect completion, there are no restaurants and there are no bathrooms, so you can't stay there. Inevitably, this manifestation of complete unconditioned love breaks apart, turns, just like our breath, and begins to manifest the plus activity, differentiation, arising, being born. And all of the things in this vast cosmos come into simultaneous being. So we have this problem as human beings because we want things to be a certain way. We want the world to function in a way which is under our control and is our, understandable and predictable and reliable. And we want it to be a world that is differentiated, or we want it to be a world that is absolute and equal. Which is it? And that's the problem. Which is it is the problem. Because in the end, these two activities of plus and minus are happening simultaneously. They happen together like a couple that is dancing together. The activity of arising and the activity of dissolving happen together, merge together. They are perfect in their simultaneity. When we see an action or we see a being, that being is both differentiated from the cosmos, but also at the very same moment completely immersed in the cosmos, at one with the cosmos. There is nowhere else for that being to be but in this very cosmos. And that seems a very difficult thing for us to embrace. Because our mind, the way that we investigate, the way that we perceive the world, is entirely based on subjective perspective. The moment that we develop a perspective, the moment that we perceive something, the moment that we contemplate something, the moment that we try to describe something, already we have chopped the world into two. This complete and flawless fabric has been divided in our mind. We stand up separate from it. So we have this present case where a monk comes to ask Fengxue. Speech and silence are concerned with equality and differentiation. So this is to say that the activity of speech or activity itself, whether we want to say it's speech or action or any mode of operation, is a manifestation of the world of differentiation. And silence or stillness is concerned or is a manifestation of the activity of minus, dissolution. When we do the sutra walk in the evening, this is the practice that we're engaged in, is we're doing this activity of chanting a syllable while simultaneously taking a step. Kan, we step. And then for a moment, we're still, totally still, and there's silence, the manifestation of the minus. Ji, Zai, Bo. The way that I was taught was that the challenge of sutra walking is that we have to practice with balance between the activity and the stillness, balance between the plus and the minus. And it's very revealing in how it's manifest, how we go about doing sutra walking. Usually we are neglectful of the minus side, and it ends up very compressed. The silence is very compressed. The monk's point is speech. If speech is the manifestation of the plus activity, and silence is the manifestation of the minus activity, then regardless of whether we're speaking or whether we're silent, we fall into this trap of duality. We fall into this trap of cutting the world in half. And it seems like there's no way out of it. If we're silent and still, we're just moo junkies. We're just emptiness hounds. And if we talk and we try to express things, then we are just self-fixated egoists. So he asks Fengxue, what can I do to transcend equality and differentiation? What can I do? Where can I go which is beyond the world of plus and minus? How do I do that? And Fengxue responds, I think, quite beautifully. And he says, I always think of Jiangnan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. Day 4 of Sesshin, and we have been engaging in work practice, and we've been engaging in some hiking in the woods, and many of you are sleeping outside in tents and close to nature, and I'm quite sure that there have been moments as you're doing your work and as you connect, dissolve into the activities that you're doing, where you find a balance, whether that's sifting out compost with the chickens, or whether that's cleaning a floor, washing dishes, sewing. There are moments where we are absorbed into this manifesting activity, where we're not separate from the activity that we're engaged in. We're not looking at the activity, but we become the activity. This can happen in a moment. I remember after a sesshin one time down in Seattle, there was at the Seattle Art Museum, there was a display of old masters' art, and one of them was Rembrandt. And so I went with another monk, and we had just finished sesshin. And so if you ever get the chance to go to an art gallery or something like that after a sesshin, sometimes it's a good idea, but only go for 10 minutes. Because there were several paintings where in that sort of open space you would step in front of them and just be lost, completely dissolved into the painting. Clear that the painting is there, but completely fused with it, dissolved into it. Two, I remember in particular, one was a self-portrait of Rembrandt, and the other was by I have to always remember his name was Romney, because it was about the same time as the last election, the presidential election, and it was this woman at a spinning wheel, and I just kind of stood there for a few minutes, just kind of completely dissolved into this painting. Dissolved into a sunset, dissolved into a great cedar tree. And in those moments, trying to divide the world into the plus activity and the minus activity is stupid. And we know it to be stupid. And so we don't bother. We can just stand there and smile. Sometimes when we taste a great piece of fruit, or maybe a fantastic cup of coffee in the morning, we can just stop. It can stop us right in our tracks, and we just are, to say overwhelmed, we are immersed in that experience. And this is what Fengxue is pointing to. Rather than saying to this monk, well, why don't you try doing this? Or why don't you try practicing like that? Fengxue recites this verse in order to demonstrate what it is to go beyond the world of differentiation and equality. Demonstrating that these two aspects, these two activities are unified. They are one. Not just some of the time, but all of the time. In every activity, in every manifestation, in every transaction and every interaction. It may be the case that we are aware of one side or the other. It may be aware that we ourselves are engaged, consciously or unconsciously, in one activity more intensively than the other. But just like dancing partners, or just like two sides of a coin, even if we're completely facing one side, we know that the other side must be on the other side. It's there. What's fascinating, I think, and what Wu Men points to, he says, Fengxue functions like lightning, creating an appropriate way to practice. What Wu Men is pointing to is that this is the reason that Fengxue was the sort of sole survivor of his generation. And what Wu Men is pointing to, and why he put this case into the gateless barrier, is because it's a demonstration of the heart of the Zen school. Fengxue, apparently, when he was quite young, studied Confucian doctrine, and with the idea of becoming a government official. but he did too poorly on his examinations, and so he decided that he'd become a Buddhist priest, probably in great humiliation as a disappointment to his family. And he studied in the Tendai sect first, which is a lot more emphasis on the study of sutras and the sort of scholarly and philosophical aspect of Buddhist study and doctrine. And it was later, the amazing thing is later in those days, he was 24 or 25 years old when he had finished with the Tendai sect and Confucianism and started practicing with a Zen teacher. And what he's facing here is must have been sorely tempting to a person who came up in such a way, came up through such study, is a particularly philosophical, intelligent questioner. In fact, the way that it's translated here cuts out a whole portion of how complex the question actually is, because the question is originally speech and silence are concerned with bi and ri, which refers to a work by a monk named Sojo, who was one of the early translators of sutras, and he was sentenced to death, and he asked for 7 days before he was to be executed. And in the 7 days, he wrote this treatise, a philosophy about bi and ri, the subtle equality and differentiation. And so this question is like PhD question coming at him. And so, of course, the temptation is to respond in kind, respond philosophically and intellectually to try to explain it. Certainly, I fall into this trap all the time. And for me, I find that to respond to something intellectually is sometimes a great deal easier, if not beneficial. To respond in a lively fashion, to respond directly with a demonstration of the way, is difficult. When you're tired, when you're busy, when you're distracted by other thinking, to be able to bring yourself completely into the moment in order to respond, which is required in order to respond genuinely in the Zen tradition, gosh, that's hard work. And that's what we're doing here this week, is more and more trying to really get a felt understanding of what it is to be completely engaged in what it is that you're doing, whether that's sifting compost, or whether that's cleaning the floor, or whether that's cooking in the kitchen, to be able to respond to the arising circumstances with every bit of your energy. It's so much easier to rattle off some ideas. It's so much easier to come up with a bunch of nice sounding words than to bring up everything and just hit it, you know? So this is a classic question, and we can look at different teachers in different ways and say, you know, how would this teacher have responded, do you think? How would that teacher have responded? Rinzai, you know, how can I transcend equality and differentiation? Cuts! In that moment, you're completely absorbed into that shout. Differentiation, equality, simultaneously merged. Or his teacher, Obaku, was known for his stick. Linji talks about it. 3 times I questioned, and 3 times I was hit. And it's the same thing. It's not done so much anymore in Zen, maybe thankfully. Obaku one time pinched somebody's nose. And it's not so popular anymore, but in that moment when we bang our finger with the hammer, or when we catch our hand in the door or something like this, that physical, overwhelming, stubbing our toe is a good one. I do that a lot. I've got big feet. So stubbing your toe in that moment of pain, subject and object, the differentiated and the equal, are revealed in their completion. And you can't be anywhere else. You can't stub your toe and go, oh, I wonder what I've got to do next week. Like, it doesn't happen. You're just like, fuck, that hurt. Maybe it's the same thing too when somebody just reaches out to take your hand. Maybe it's the same thing too when someone opens their arms and offers an embrace. We can completely unify, dissolve, plus and minus become one, and the experience speaks for itself. There's no words. Sometimes something funny happens. Someone does something hilarious, and we both burst into laughter, and in that burst of laughter, subject and object become one. And we are not outside of the laughter. We're not outside of the embrace. We're not outside of the shout. And what Fengxue is pointing to is the experience. I always think of Jiangnan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. Now, I've never been to Jiangnan in March or in any time. But I can certainly grasp what this verse is pointing to. There have been many moments where I have stood up in the evening breeze and been immersed, taken away by the sunshine in the leaves and the sound of birds. Wumen asks, why does he get involved with the tongue of a predecessor and not free himself? So Wumen asks a great question, which is, he first says he functions like lightning. His response is immediate. He doesn't and ha about it. He doesn't try to respond with an intellectual, philosophical way. He immediately responds with a demonstration. But interesting that he would choose to quote somebody rather than maybe say something of his own. Why? The woman says, why? Why does he do that? This experience of dissolution, this experience of the unification of the plus and minus activity, this merging is not a special thing. It's not something that only happens rarely, and it's not something that only happens to certain kinds of people, and it's not something that You have to possess something unusual in order to experience. This is something that is manifesting continuously all around us. The only thing that's rare, I guess we could say, is that it is recognized for what it is. Sometimes when we're engaged in practice, and certainly I've had the privilege of having this pointed out to me and seeing it in my own practice, we can hear something over and over and over again. Maybe it's something in the Heart Sutra or one of the sutras that we chant, or maybe it's something that our teachers say over and over and over again. And it makes sense. Intellectually, it makes sense. But it doesn't schmeck, it doesn't resonate, it doesn't strike the core. And then one day we can be working in a garden or building something out of wood or cooking in the kitchen or cleaning something, and just in that moment, just in that breath, those words, that exposition, that phrase clicks. And the complete picture, the plus and the minus that's being pointed to in that moment is revealed to us completely. We awaken. We realize it. And Zen is replete with examples of this phenomena over and over again. Stones knocking on bamboo, legs being broken indoors, people being smacked and yelled at, a flower being held up. Over and over again, these simple gestures expose the complete picture. But like Wu Men says, it's like a dream that you can't explain to somebody else who hasn't seen that completion, who hasn't awoken to it. If you can see intimately into this point, the way will open for you naturally. Naturally, in your everyday functioning. If you understand that Zen isn't about philosophy and it's not about poetry, if you're able to see the Dharma function in the everyday activities around you, then we can say that we're practicing Zen. The sutra of our everyday life is unfolding before us all the time, and all we need to do is develop the eyes to see it. In Dogen's major text is called the Shobo Genzo, and this means the treasury of the true Dharma eye. And in Zen we talk about the Dharma eye, the eye that sees beyond just the superficial differentiated world and sees the whole picture. This is the eye that gives us right view that Rinzai was talking about yesterday. Genuine insight, complete view. And this also refers to the first fold of the eightfold noble path, right view. If we don't grasp this, the reason it's so important is that if we don't grasp this, if we don't grasp this big picture, if we don't embody and realize the complete manifestation of this cosmos, plus and minus activities simultaneously interacting, then we can do nothing but make mistakes, because our opinions and our activities are based on an idea of this and that, subject-object, equality and differentiation as a separate function. How can we not go wrong? When we do grasp this, where is the wrong that we can go? Now Wu Men says, now set aside the samadhi of words. Set aside, samadhi means at one with. At one with. So setting aside the samadhi of words, Wu Men says, how do you say it? How will you demonstrate this? Over and over throughout the Gateless Barrier, Wu Men turns it around on us and says, this is not a fucking book. You're not supposed to sit there and read this before you go to bed at night. This is a instruction manual. This is a practical guide, a how to wake up. So right from the beginning, in the very first case, he says several times, tell me, what is the barrier of the ancestors? Doesn't it sound wonderful? Isn't there anyone that wants to pass this? I ask you again, how do you manifest this realization? Employ every ounce of your energy to embrace this no. Over and over again throughout this text, he says, how do you do it? What's he talking about here? How would you do it? This is a wonderful story in which a principle is being demonstrated. That's what koan means. It means a public case. And it's like it's a legal term, and it's like what we use in terms, we say precedent. There's a legal precedent. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about what actually happened to make that a law, and we use cases in order to demonstrate the principle that was going on. This person, so-and-so versus so-and-so, that's how the case came out. This is the law. That's how it was determined. It's called a legal precedent. And that's what these koans are, is they are dharma precedents. But we have to grasp the precedent. We have to grasp the public case. We have to grasp what's going on in the case and digest it and manifest it ourselves if we're going to practice Zen. You can't do that as a philosopher. You can't do that as an intellect. You have to embody it. You've got to bring forth all of your energy and not take a shortcut. All of you have done enough koans to know that you can't even demonstrate the first koan. You can't demonstrate how can I manifest a flower half-assedly. You can't do it with your mouth sitting on your zafu. You can't do it while you're thinking about something else. And that's before we even start. This is just a beginning. So Wu Men asks, just give me one phrase. So if you were in this situation, how would you respond? Wu Men's verse says, it was not a verse of elegant tone. This is Wu Men, the poetry critic. But it's true. I always think of Jiangnan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. It's not fancy poetry. It's not high literature by any stretch of the imagination. It's utterly simple. And Wu Men, also one of the things that we get to know about him as we investigate the gateless barrier is that it is often the case that if he's criticizing somebody, it's a great compliment. And if he's complimenting somebody, you better watch out. Except when he's complimenting them, for real. Before speaking, it's already expressed. Like I say, I think all of us, when we hear this verse, I always think of Jiangnan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. It's very easy to dissolve into that expression. Already we are connected. Already we are enmeshed with these partridges. If you go on chattering glibly, you'll find yourself at a loss. In such occasions, I remember one evening a long time ago during a session on Galiano Island, and it was a long morning of sitting, and I came out onto the deck, and it was must have been a winter session because it was really cold, and the place where we sat overlooked a channel, and then Salt Spring Island was on the other side. And my teacher, Eshu, was standing on the deck with his arms folded behind his back. And I walked out to the end of the deck, and he was just looking out at Salt Spring Island. And so I was like, okay. So I looked out at Salt Spring Island as well, and just the mists clinging to the branches in the morning on Galiano Island, and the fog over the channel, and then snow on the tops of the hills and small mountains on Salt Spring Island. And it was just gone. I was gone. And we sort of simultaneously turned to one another, and Eshin just said, "Beautiful." And having both just completely gone, there was nothing else to say. Not even a, "yes it is," or a, "oh totally, I particularly..." And in fact, if anything, another word and we both would have been lost. And Wu Men, pointing to this, is saying this is not flowery speech. But when we've had the experience, flowery speech is out of, it's not called for. Sometimes there isn't even a word. There's just a glint in the eye, a recognition, a mutual sharing and a smile. And this is the case exactly in the story of the Buddha and the transmission to Mahakasyapa. The Buddha holds up a flower. Mahakasyapa smiles. There isn't anything else to say. Okay. That's it for today. Just the temptation, particularly at this point in session, is to start to break up, is to start to want to express. Our bodies have started to acclimatize and ease up, and our eyes are starting to come up, open. Occasionally we'll look at each other in the face, smile. It's okay. The temptation, though, is the energy that we've created is starting to bubble, and we want to connect. So I just want to really encourage you to keep things stable, because it's like a great swelling dam that if we say, oh, it's okay to do this or it's okay to do that, very quickly it just starts to spill out all over. We've still got a long way to go in this session, so really pay attention and allow that energy to carry you through the rest of this session with a focused awareness, and genuinely enjoy the manifestation of this activity as we continue through this week, meeting whatever arises in our practice with open hearts. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.